All right, prepare to dive deeper into the chilling depths of history. Imagine a queen whose greatest treasure wasn't glittering gold, sparkling jewels, or vast territories. No, her most prized possession was a flowing white liquid, milk. Picture a monarch gripped by a terrifying delusion. She believed her own body could magically feed an entire nation. She twisted her grand palace into an unsettling temple devoted to this milky obsession, spiraling her royal rule into pure madness. This eerie blend of devotion and derangement sounds like a dark fairy tale, a disturbing legend whispered in shadowed corners. But what if such a queen truly existed? A flesh and blood ruler whose strange, all-consuming obsession slowly devoured her kingdom from the inside out. How did this bizarre belief take root in her mind, like an insidious weed choking all reason? And what was the horrifying cost for her once thriving empire, suffocated by an unstoppable tide of white madness? Before we plunge into this unsettling narrative, I want to hear from you. What's the strangest, most unbelievable thing you've ever heard about a historical figure? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're ready to dive deeper into history's darkest secrets, where truth can be stranger than fiction, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to join our quest for the forgotten truth. Our story begins with Caterina Cornaro, the fabled queen of Cyprus. In her younger days, she was renowned for her exceptional beauty. Her delicate features were framed by dark, lustrous hair. Her eyes, the color of a clear summer sky, sparkled with intelligence and vivacity. Her smile held a quiet, serene grace that captivated all who met her. She carried herself with an innate dignity, promising a stable, peaceful reign for her people. Her early years on the throne were marked by quiet competence and a sense of duty. She quickly became known as a fair, gentle, and compassionate ruler, genuinely dedicated to her island kingdom's prosperity. The Cypriot court, usually a hotbed of intrigue, instead buzzed with admiration and respect for their young queen, who seemed to embody both outward beauty and inner wisdom. Her presence was calming, her decisions guided by a desire for harmony and justice. Indeed, the kingdom flourished under her benevolent guidance. Fields yielded abundant harvests, markets bustled with trade, and a general sense of peace settled over the land. People spoke of her with reverence, seeing her as a blessing, a symbol of hope. Her beauty seemed to mirror the peaceful prosperity she brought to her realm. Life in Cyprus was good, and its queen was beloved. However, as often happens in tales, a dark shadow eventually fell. It arrived with the birth of her newborn son, a tiny, precious bundle meant to be a beacon of hope, promising continued lineage and stability for Cyprus. The entire island rejoiced, celebrating their future king with grand feasts, joyous music, and heartfelt prayers for his long and healthy life. Banners unfurled, and children's laughter echoed. Yet this profound joy was tragically short-lived. Just 3 months after his celebrated birth, the infant prince suddenly succumbed to an unknown, swift illness. His tiny, fragile life, full of promise, was cruelly snuffed out. The vibrant palace, once echoing with laughter, was plunged into unimaginable, suffocating grief. The kingdom watched, stunned, as its queen crumbled. The death of her only child shattered Caterina to her core. The once vibrant queen, known for her composure, retreated into profound, inconsolable sorrow. The bright light in her eyes dimmed, and her beautiful face became a haunting mask of loss. The entire kingdom mourned with her, feeling the heavy burden of her despair settle over the land. The sun seemed to shine less brightly, and the songs of the people turned to laments. But instead of sadness and gradual acceptance, something far more sinister took root within the grieving queen's tormented mind. A strange, insidious madness slowly replaced her grief, twisting her reality into something horrifying. Her intense mourning festered until it mutated into an utterly bizarre, all-consuming obsession. It was as if her heart broke and her mind shattered alongside it. Even after her son's tiny body was solemnly laid to rest, Katerina continued breastfeeding. She would hold her empty arms close to her chest, her gaze fixed as if her child was still nestled there, still needing her milk. This once tender act became a haunting, ritualistic performance of her shattered mind, a public display of her private agony that chilled all witnesses. She firmly believed that by continuing to produce and release her milk, she was supernaturally passing her dead son's soul through her body. It was a macabre, desperate way to feel perpetually connected to him, a frantic attempt to keep his essence alive and flowing from her being. This belief, born from grief, became the terrifying, inescapable core of her new, distorted reality, shaping every thought and action. Her palace, once a bustling center of royal activity, began to transform, adapting to her strange new demands. Soon, she ordered the creation of special, secluded rooms deep within the royal residence. These chambers, chillingly named lactoria, were dedicated solely to collecting her own milk, and later the milk of other women. These were not places of comfort, but of hushed, fearful reverence. Only certain women, carefully chosen for their perceived purity and fertility, were permitted entry into these secret spaces. They followed Katerina's strict, increasingly elaborate, and often whispered rules. The air in these lactoria grew thick with the sweet, heavy scent of milk and an unsettling, most religious reverence. A palpable sense of something both holy and profane. Milk quickly ceased to be mere nourishment for the queen. It became her new, all-consuming religion, her absolute truth, the very essence of her existence. She believed it wasn't just sustaining her physical body, but directly fueling her royal power, making her stronger, more divine, more untouchable than any mortal ruler. It was the elixir of her sovereignty, the blood of her new faith. Her decrees, once sensible and just, grew progressively stranger. She began to insist that all her subjects wear garments of pure white, reflecting milk's supposed sanctity. Conversations at court, once about state matters, now revolved exclusively around this milky obsession, with courtiers forced to speak of milk as if it were currency, the measure of all things important in the kingdom. The palace itself, once filled with enticing aromas, slowly began to take on a new, pervasive, and disturbing smell. At first, it was a warm, slightly sweet scent, like fresh milk and honey. It was unsettling in its omnipresence, but not yet truly alarming, just an oddity. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the scent changed. It grew heavier, sickeningly cloying, almost rancid in certain places, particularly near the lactoria. People whispered nervously about strange, soft, gurgling sounds that seemed to emanate from within the thick walls, faint and unsettling in the silent watches of the night. It was the sound of liquid, moving, shifting, waiting. Katerina's husband, King James, initially tried to intervene, to reason with her, to pull her back from the precipice of this growing madness. He pleaded, argued, sought desperate help from physicians and priests, desperate to reclaim the vibrant woman he had married. He saw the woman he loved slipping away, piece by agonizing piece, but her obsession had already taken too deep a hold, wrapping itself around her mind like an unyielding vine. He eventually gave up, his spirit utterly broken by her unyielding conviction and the impenetrable wall of her delusion. The king withdrew, living a life separate and isolated from his queen, a heartbroken prisoner in his own palace, watching her horrifying descent into unreason with paralyzing horror. The entire court, once a vibrant hub of political intrigue and social gatherings, now adapted to Katerina's bizarre new reality. Doctors, once focused on human ailments, found their unsettling duty was to monitor the kingdom's milk supplies with the same vigilance as vital state secrets. A special register was created, a chilling document listing all women in the kingdom, from noblewomen to peasants, capable of producing milk. Their names were noted, their yield recorded with grim precision. Those with plentiful supplies were chillingly granted special favor, rising in the queen's twisted social hierarchy. To produce milk was to hold power, to lack it was to be nothing. Katerina's personal pain, the devastating loss of her son, had now mutated into a terrifying doctrine, gripping the entire nation. She truly believed that her own body, and by chilling extension, the bodies of all her female subjects, could literally nourish an entire empire, not just with sustenance, but with spiritual and political power. It was a grotesque perversion of motherhood, twisted beyond recognition into a controlling system, a dark mockery of life itself. As her madness deepened, Katerina's perception of people fundamentally changed. She no longer saw unique individuals or loyal subjects. Her gaze became distant, unsettlingly fixed, as if looking through them, seeing only their potential as milk producers, as vessels for her obsession. A constant, unsettling odor clung to her, a pervasive mix of souring milk and sickly sweet incense, an increasingly frantic attempt to mask the underlying decay. This scent, once subtle, became an inseparable part of her presence, a chilling sign of her utter detachment from the sane world. It was the smell of her madness made manifest. In a shocking display of her new beliefs, Katerina began openly taking lovers. Yet these weren't affairs of passion. Each new lover, usually a young courtier, was subjected to a bizarre, degrading ritual that served only her warped sense of power and control. It was an act of chilling submission. She would force them to drink warm milk, presented in a pristine white bowl. As they swallowed the cloying, often curdling liquid, a tremor of disgust or fear running through them. She would utter, her voice flat and chillingly devoid of emotion, "Now, you are part of me." It was an act of cold possession, designed to assert absolute dominance. This ritual of forced milk consumption quickly became the strange, terrifying path to power and favor within the palace. Many courtiers, desperate for influence or too terrified to refuse, would faint from overwhelming repulsion or the crushing psychological burden of its degrading symbolism. The air grew thick with the scent of fear and warm milk. Yet none dared refuse the queen's demand. The suffocating fear of her growing, unpredictable power outweighed their personal disgust. They drank the warm, sour liquid, coating their throats, and in doing so became irrevocably complicit in her escalating madness, binding themselves to her bizarre, decaying world. Silent, strange, and deeply unsettling night ceremonies also began to take place in the deeper, darker parts of the palace. Katerina would whisper to chosen men, her voice barely audible, her words a chilling promise, and a veiled threat: "You will feed on me." The phrase hung heavy yet in the air, a disturbing invitation to something unspeakable. Then, her eyes glinting with a disturbing light, she would clarify, "Not on me, but on the power that flows within me, the very essence of my being." It was a twisted declaration of her perceived divine essence, her godlike status, the ultimate sacrifice she demanded, not of their lives, but of their souls. These rituals were shrouded in absolute secrecy, their implications horrifyingly unclear, festering like a wound in the heart of the court. As the queen's behavior grew progressively more erratic, volatile, and dangerous, some courtiers, those with enough foresight or courage, began to flee the kingdom under cover of darkness. Others, less fortunate, simply disappeared from the palace altogether, their fates unknown, leaving only chilling rumors. Meanwhile, among the common people, whispers of the White Mother began to circulate. Many, desperate and uneducated, believed she possessed strange, supernatural healing powers, imagining her sacred milk could cure their sicknesses. This made her both feared and eerily revered, a figure of dark, superstitious legend, a grotesque goddess of a dying land. King James, broken in spirit and utterly weary, made one last valiant stand. He confronted Katerina directly, his voice trembling with anguish, demanding an end to the madness and a return to rightful rule. His plea was filled with raw emotion, hoping against hope to shake her from her delusions. In response, Katerina simply offered him a pristine cup of milk, her eyes holding an unnerving, terrifying calm, devoid of emotion. It was both an invitation to her delusion and an undeniable, chilling challenge. The king, disgusted and utterly defeated, refused, turning away from her and, in doing so, sealing his own tragic fate. From that day forward, Katerina ruled alone, utterly consumed by her obsession. All royal documents and decrees were no longer signed with traditional ink. Instead, they bore a unique, chilling signature, white paint meticulously mixed with drops of her own sacred milk, a declaration of impermanence and arbitrary power. She further forced the ladies of the court, even those of highest birth, to expose their breasts at grand receptions, acts once unthinkable. It was a bizarre, shocking, and humiliating display, meant to normalize her obsession and infuse her twisted beliefs into every aspect of court life. It was a brutal violation of decency. "Breasts are not shameful," she would declare, her voice ringing with unnerving conviction through the palace. "They are a throne, the very seat of power and life." It was her terrifying way of asserting the ultimate power of the female body's lactating function as the absolute foundation of her decaying empire. A throne made of flesh and milk. She would ritualistically wash her pale hands in bowls of fresh milk. Then, in an act of profound public humiliation, she would make her most senior advisors kneel before her, forcing them, in their ornate robes, to wipe spilled milk from the gleaming palace floors. Their faces would be masks of shame and fear. "Milk must not be wasted," she would command, her eyes glinting with chilling intensity. This act was not about cleanliness. It was about absolute submission, a brutal test of loyalty to her deranged ideology, a public display of tyrannical power over their dignity. As the bizarre rituals continued to escalate, dark rumors spread throughout the kingdom like a plague. Whispers of a terrible curse settling upon the land grew louder. The very air, once vibrant, seemed to thicken with a pervasive sense of impending doom. The royal garden, once a fragrant paradise, now smelled faintly and sickeningly of rancid milk clinging to delicate flowers and pathways. Palace walls, once pristine, began to darken with insidious dampness and strange, milky stains. Katerina, lost in her twisted world, seemed oblivious, seeing only purity where there was decay. After King James eventually passed away, a quiet death hastened by his despair, and her parade of ever-changing lovers inexplicably vanished. Katerina found a new, even more disturbing comfort. She surrounded herself with countless jars, flasks, and ornate vessels, all filled to the brim with milk in various states of freshness and decay. She would sit silently among them, a solitary, ghost-like figure, whispering nonsensical endearments to the containers as if they were living beings, her only true companions. "I am the mother of the world," she would murmur, her voice soft, eerie, and utterly devoid of true human connection. The milk had become her only true confidant, reflecting back her own madness. Then came her most crushing, catastrophic decree, the implementation of a universal milk tax. Every woman in the kingdom, regardless of her station or whether she had recently given birth, was now compelled by royal law to donate a flask of her own milk each month to the crown. It was an unbearable burden that weighed heavily, cruelly, and literally upon the breasts of the populace, a constant drain on their bodies and spirits. To enforce this new, terrible law, Katerina created a special, terrifying corps of grace collectors. These figures, clad in stark white cloaks, moved silently and menacingly through villages and towns, ensuring every last drop was collected, sowing deep-seated fear, widespread resentment, and utter despair wherever their pale presence fell. Katerina claimed this vast, ever-growing supply of collected milk would be used for noble, wondrous purposes. She spoke in rambling, fervent tones of making special, miraculous ointments for healing, grinding it into vibrant pigments for sacred icon paint, and even brewing mysterious, life-prolonging drinks exclusively for the royal family. Her explanations were wild, rambling, and increasingly nonsense. Sickle courtiers, desperate to remain in her favor, would nod earnestly, their faces carefully schooled to expressions of profound understanding, pretending to comprehend her elaborate, impossible plans. They praised her genius, feigning deep understanding of her erratic, delusional visions, their souls slowly dying inside. Soon, vast, overflowing barrels of collected milk began to fill the castle courtyard, an absurd, grotesque, and horrifying sight. In the warm Cypriot climate, the milk quickly soured, fermenting and putrefying under the relentless sun, creating an unbearable, stomach-churning stench that permeated every corner of the palace, clinging to tapestries and breath alike. Clouds of buzzing, fat flies, drawn by the sickening sweetness of decay, descended upon the overflowing, festering barrels, creating a thick, dark haze that swarmed and pulsed. Yet the queen, walking serenely and obliviously among the putrefying containers, saw only profound meaning and sacred purpose. She called the vile stench decay's truth, an indispensable part of her grand, twisted design. She even began holding chilling milk inspections, brutal public spectacles designed to reinforce her control. Women from across the kingdom were paraded before her, their breasts publicly scrutinized. Those deemed to have small breasts or an insufficient milk supply were publicly shamed. They were then forced to wear a crude, empty jug around their necks, conspicuously marked with the word empty, a public badge of their perceived failure and inadequacy. It was a cruel, dehumanizing, and deeply humiliating ritual designed to enforce her absolute authority and solidify her warped, tyrannical beliefs. Ambassadors from other sophisticated European courts, once frequent visitors, slowly stopped coming to Cyprus altogether. Reports sent back to their home countries spoke in hushed, horror, refined tones of a white madness that had seized the capital, painting a terrifying picture of Katerina's bizarre and dangerous reign. They described a once proud kingdom slowly suffocating under a literal tide of putrid milk, ruled by a queen who had utterly lost her mind. The once respected Cypriot court became a place of morbid curiosity, fearful avoidance, and deep revulsion, its international reputation in tatters, its former glory a fading memory. Katerina, completely undeterred and seemingly oblivious to the world's opinion, ordered new, grotesque flags designed for her kingdom. The guards' shields, once emblazoned with noble coats of arms, were now replaced with shocking new symbols, a stark, stylized woman's breast, or even more simply, a stark white spot. These chilling emblems were a direct visual representation of her singular obsession, a constant, unavoidable reminder of her bizarre, tyrannical rule. They flew high over the palace, proclaiming her unique, unsettling dominion and her profound madness to all who dared to approach, a silent scream against the blue sky. She also established a dedicated milk laboratory deep within the castle, a place whispered about with dread. Here, a group of frightened, desperate alchemists toiled ceaselessly under her watchful eye, brewing strange, bubbling, foul-smelling mixtures from the vast collected milk. The air in the lab was thick with acrid, stinging fumes and an unsettling hum. Rumors spread that working too long in this horrifying lab drove men stark raving mad. The vapors themselves were poisonous to the mind. One humble monk, who dared to whisper that he heard the milk itself speaking to him, was swiftly and brutally executed, his grim fate a chilling warning. Katerina's conversations became increasingly erratic, unpredictable, and terrifying. In one moment, she might praise a court lady lavishly, commending her beauty or fleeting loyalty. The very next moment, without warning, her mood would shift dramatically, her eyes clouding wit, sudden wrath. She would then, without hesitation, order the same unfortunate woman to be doused from head to toe with milk, a humiliating, chilling, and profoundly public spectacle. Immediately following this degrading act, the drenched, terrified lady would be summarily banished from court, her favor instantly lost, her future uncertain, her reputation ruined, when a small, desperate village, unable to bear the crippling burden of the incessant milk tax any longer, finally dared to rebel. Katerina's response was swift, merciless, and brutally efficient. Guards were dispatched to quell the uprising, their orders silent but terrifyingly clear. Complete eradication. All news, all communication, all human contact from that village ceased abruptly and permanently. On the royal maps and official records, the village's entry was simply and chillingly marked "cleared," a euphemism so terrifyingly understated, it spoke volumes about its complete eradication, erased from existence, leaving only a lingering scar on the land. The very air within the castle walls grew thick, cloying, and sickeningly sweet, a suffocating, inescapable atmosphere created by countless flasks, jars, and barrels of milk stored in every available space, filling every alcove and corridor. The pervasive scent was omnipresent, impossible to escape, clinging to clothes, skin, and even hair, a constant reminder of the Queen's suffocating madness. Katerina, however, walked among these countless vessels barefoot, her expression serene, almost blissfully content. She truly believed she was feeling the breath of her people, experiencing the vital, essential essence of her decaying empire, utterly oblivious to the unbearable stench, the visible decay, and the profound suffering that surrounded her on all sides. At the annual Harvest Festival, a day traditionally celebrated with abundance and merriment, Katerina made a shocking and catastrophic decree. She ordered the city's central fountain, usually sparkling with clear water, to be filled to the brim, not with wine, but with milk. It was meant to be a grand gesture, a lavish symbol of her reign's bounty. But under the hot, relentless Cypriot sun, the vast quantity of milk quickly soured, fermenting into an unbearable putrid stench that choked the entire city, making breathing a struggle. Animals collapsed in the streets, succumbing to the toxic fumes. Yet Katerina stood proudly before the foul-smelling, bubbling fountain, inhaling deeply, her face alight with horrifying rapture. "This is the smell of life," she declared, her voice resonating with unshakable conviction, echoing across the horrified crowd. "This is the smell of power." Her detachment from reality was now absolute, her delusion utterly unbreakable. While the palace filled with milk, the country suffered terribly. Famine gripped the land, a cruel irony given the Queen's obsession. Cows, crucial for sustenance, sickened and died in droves, as did children, wasting away from hunger and disease. Fields, once fertile, dried up and cracked under the relentless sun. Devastating reports of widespread suffering, disease, and death poured into the palace, but Katerina merely marked them cleared, as if acknowledging them instantly erased the problem, denying the true, unfolding horror. In her increasing delusion, Katerina began to believe she had achieved ultimate enlightenment. She no longer referred to herself merely as Queen or even the White Mother. Now, she took on a grander, more terrifying title, Supreme Mother, a goddess walking among mortals. This new, chilling title reflected her belief in her ultimate connection to all life, all sustenance, all power in the universe. She saw herself as the universal source, a godlike figure whose very being sustained the entire world, or at the very least, her rapidly failing, crumbling kingdom. As her rule entered its darkest phase, all courtiers were forced to undergo yet another bizarre and degrading ritual. They had to smear their faces with a thick white paste, a strange concoction made from milk, finely ground chalk, and honey. It was a grotesque, unchanging mask of forced conformity, erasing their individuality. The streets of the capital, once bustling with vibrant life, now filled with these white-faced figures. They moved like ghosts, their expressions hidden, their humanity slowly being erased by the Queen's relentless madness, a chilling, uniform spectacle for any foreign observer. They were no longer people, but extensions of her will. Katerina began dictating new laws, not on parchment with indelible ink, but using milk itself as her medium. She would write her decrees on fine paper, but the words, applied with milk, would invariably disappear within a single day, fading into complete invisibility. Truth should not live forever, she declared, her voice echoing with chilling finality in the silent council chambers. It was a terrifying pronouncement that suggested her capricious, ever-changing will, rather than enduring law, was the only constant, the only true power that mattered. Young men from across the kingdom were sent on a supposed pilgrimage, a sacred journey from which, chillingly, none ever returned. Katerina would rejoice in their mysterious absence, delighting in the delusional belief that the country was now becoming as soft as a breast, purified, feminized, and utterly compliant, emptied of all male resistance, ready to be nurtured and controlled. Her behavior became even more unpredictable, her moods swinging wildly from serene calm to uncontrollable wrath. She would force visiting ambassadors to drink milk as a diplomatic communion, an act meant to symbolize unity, but instead causing profound discomfort and thinly veiled disgust. In other moments, she would deliberately, almost playfully, spill milk onto the polished floors of the palace, creating glistening white puddles. Then, with a cryptic, unsettling smile, she would declare it was meant to dampen the footsteps of sin. A bizarre, ritualistic attempt to ward off perceived evil with her sacred liquid, an absurd ritual of purification. People living in the capital began to experience strange, pervasive phenomena. They started to hallucinate that the very air itself was thick with the overwhelming, sickeningly sweet smell of milk, even in places and at times when no milk was physically present. It was a collective sensory delusion, a shared madness creeping into the minds of her tormented subjects. Doctors, perplexed and terrified by these widespread reports of delirium, tried desperately to attribute the symptoms to the weather or some unknown fever. They dared not suggest the true, horrifying cause, the Queen's profound, pervasive madness poisoning the very minds of her subjects. Katerina herself seemed to undergo a terrifying physical transformation, her body becoming less human, more spectral. She appeared like a plaster figure, unnervingly pale and almost completely unmoving, her skin appearing translucent, almost waxen. A faint, unsettling steam of milk and sweat seemed to emanate constantly from her, a visible, chilling aura of her ongoing decay, a human shell consumed by obsession. For her final, most desperate, and truly catastrophic whim, Katerina issued a devastating command. She ordered all remaining milk reserves in the entire kingdom to be painstakingly gathered and then poured into the central square of the capital. It was to be her last, grand, and utterly destructive gesture, a final act of devotion to her milky god. The sheer, unimaginable volume of milk left to fester under the unforgiving Cypriot sun quickly turned into a putrid, unbearable stench that enveloped, choked, and suffocated the entire city. The air grew so toxic, so thick with the nauseating smell of decay, that animals collapsed senselessly in the streets, unable to breathe. Mass infections began to sweep uncontrollably through the populace, a direct, horrifying consequence of the unsanitary toxic conditions and the omnipresent stench. The palace walls themselves started to grow thick, dark, oozing mold, and the once grand halls became sickeningly sweet and sticky with the residue of countless spills, a grotesque testament to her reign. Katerina's own body began a horrifying process of rotting grotesquely while she was still alive and breathing. Her breasts, once symbols of her power and twisted obsession, swelled grotesquely, becoming inflamed, agonizingly painful, and bleeding profusely, ravaged by a terrible, untreatable infection. The very source of her delusion became the source of her excruciating suffering. Yet, she fiercely refused all doctors, all attempts at medical aid, pushing them away with surprising strength. She clung to her delusion with a desperate, dying grasp, believing that her sacred milk, the very source of her agonizing pain, would somehow miraculously heal her, purify her, and make her whole and divine again. It was a final, tragic irony. She lay among countless vessels of milk, her chamber now a grotesque, horrifying parody of her sacred lactoria, a scene of both worship and decay. In her final delirium, she tried desperately to utter one last liturgy, a final, fervent prayer to her milky god. Yet her strength failed her, her voice a mere croak. She fell, collapsing onto the milk-soaked floor, spilling the precious white liquid everywhere, a final, pathetic waste. No one came to her aid. The palace was empty, abandoned, or too afraid to approach. Delirious, she called out for her dead son, her voice a reedy, heartbreaking whisper, a last remnant of her maternal grief. Then she laughed, a dry, rasping sound, utterly devoid of mirth, saying that all milk eventually returns home to its source. Her last words, uttered with terrifying, chilling clarity in her dying breath, were, "I am the source," a final, horrifying declaration of her utter, consuming madness, her ultimate, warped identification with the very substance that had destroyed her. Doctors eventually recorded her death from a severe, overwhelming, and utterly untreatable infection, her body consumed by the very thing she worshipped. Her room was a horrifying, unspeakable sight, a grotesque mix of a prayer place and a slaughterhouse, coated in foul-smelling, putrefying milk, blood, and various bodily fluids, a testament to her final agony. The stench, the decay, the pervasive horror of the scene was so utterly unbearable, so deeply ingrained, that courtiers were forced to burn everything within her chamber, leaving nothing behind but ash and a lingering foul odor. The entire palace wing, where she had resided, was immediately sealed off, its heavy doors and windows nailed shut, never to be opened or entered again, a tomb to her madness. It was said, in the years that followed, that all the cats and dogs in Cyprus died that year, victims not just of the plague, but of the toxic air and the widespread unsanitary conditions that permeated the land. Katerina was buried without ceremony, without honor, her passing met with a profound, collective, and deeply mournful sigh of relief from her tormented, traumatized people. But a strange emptiness, a palpable void, also settled over the land, as if the country, once vibrant and alive, had lost its very lifeblood, its essential essence, its soul. The madness had been lifted, the immediate horror removed, but its deep, unyielding scars remained, carved into the very landscape and the psyche of the people, a haunting legacy. Years, even decades later, chilling stories persisted of a milky, ethereal fog that would sometimes rise inexplicably from the sea, drifting inland, smelling faintly of something sweet and rotten. Whispers also spoke of strange, stubborn white stains that would mysteriously reappear on the sealed palace walls, defying all attempts to remove them, bleeding through layers of plaster and paint. These were chilling, spectral reminders of Katerina's lingering madness, A queen whose bizarre, all-consuming obsession literally drowned an empire in a tide of white horror. This was not just a queen, it was a living, breathing obsession that consumed a nation, a tragic figure who became one with her own terrifying delusion. If this dark, unsettling tale has utterly shocked you, if it has sent a shiver down your spine, then please help me reach 1,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button now. And don't forget to tell me in the comments below which other forgotten royal scandal, which shocking historical secret, or which bizarre, unexplained true story you want us to uncover next in the dark corners of history.